Hey everybody, today I'm going to show you how to change the tension strut control arm on your BMW F2x, F3x xDrive vehicle. Now some of the steps are extremely similar for rear wheel drive, but it's a lot easier because there's no collar bolt to undo and no drive axle to maneuver out of the way. So I'll say what the rear wheel drive steps are through this, but we're going to demonstrate this on my xDrive vehicle. So that said, let's get started. So this first step is xDrive only, and I'm just going to use a pick and remove my center cap here. And removing that center cap is going to expose the collar bolt here, which connects the hub to the drive axle. Obviously if you're rear wheel drive you won't have this. Also if you're pre-LCI, so pre-midlife cycle refresh, you'll have an additional cover over this bolt, and unfortunately you can't just pull it out of here. You actually have to get the wheel in the air, take the wheel off, take off that cover, and then if you have something strong enough to undo this collar bolt, great, do it while the car's in the air. Otherwise you'll have to put the wheel back on and lower the car to where I have it right now. So this drive axle collar bolt uses a 17mm hex, and it's torqued really tightly. So I mean, if you have the car up in the air, maybe someone can get in the cabin and stand on the brake. If you don't have someone to stand on the brake, then you'll definitely have to do what I've done here and put the car on the ground so that the car's weight can hold the car steady, and then use a large breaker bar to get this bolt loose. Now that that collar bolt has had its brake torque released, let's go ahead and put the car up into the air. Now that the car is in the air, let's go ahead and take our 17mm and finish removing the wheel. So here we are looking into the wheel well, and the forwardmost control arm is our tension strut, so that's what we're going to be removing. If you're wondering why things look a little bit strange here, particularly why my tension strut arm is sitting half off of the monoball, well, that's exactly why I'm taking it out right now. I guess the press fit on this particular part wasn't all that great, and I need to add some Loctite in addition to pressing it back. That said, this monoball I have was a beta part, and I was the first xDrive car to get this and go through beta, so I guess I shouldn't be totally surprised that it's shown a little bit of an issue later on. And I know that the outer diameter is something that the company revised since I got my beta part. So now that we've taken a look at the suspension, let's go ahead and continue to fully remove this collar bolt. And you can see the bolt here. It's got some grease on the end threads, and it's loaded with a spring. BMW says these are one-time use, so go ahead and grab a new one if you're going to do this job and pull this bolt out. So next we have to remove these front quarter underbody panels, and there's a couple screws facing the wheel well and a couple screws on the bottom that we have to remove, and then we can just kind of pull that part out. You may have to bend some of the other panels out of the way, but you should be able to remove this one without having to remove any of the other panels. Now that we've got that bottom cover off, we can take a look here and see the bolt that secures the tension strut to the subframe, and that is an 18mm. So I've already pre-loosened this, but I'm going to go ahead and remove it and take this really long bolt out. Now that the arm is unsecured and loose, it should be a little bit easier to maneuver and pull out of the knuckle. So here we are under the car looking at the various suspension arms, and if we go over here to the knuckle, you can see that right there's the tension strut connection to the knuckle. And luckily the nut and counter hold are on the bottom, so there's plenty of access. And this is going to be a 21mm socket for the nut and a T40 Torx for the counter hold. Sometimes you can get the nut off, or you can get it started without the counter hold. So I'm going to see if I can do that, and if not, then I will switch over to my counter hold tools. now that the nut securing the tension strut to the knuckle is loose, we can't actually pull it out yet, right? If we pull it up, try and pull it up, it actually just runs into the drive shaft here. So what we have to do is we have to pull the drive shaft out and maneuver it in such a way that we have enough clearance to pull the top of the tension strut out. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it. You can see here, you just pull it in, and then you can kind of, maneuver it wherever you need to. It can also help if you turn the wheel to give more clearance on the back side, so you can pull this out and place it back here. Okay, so as you can see, right, I've turned the wheel so to give myself a little bit extra clearance on this back side. I've pulled in and pulled up this axle, and that allows me to maneuver this tension strut arm right out of the knuckle. Okay, now I'm ready to try to install the arm. I'll try and do this the opposite way, and gotta try and maneuver the drive axle out of the way so I can get this ball joint in. There we go, just like that. That's in there. I can go ahead and take my drive axle and kind of get it reseated into the hub. And in order to make sure it's seated into the hub, you can twist it and rotate it left and right, because what happens is there's locking teeth in between the drive axle and the hub, and so you don't want the teeth to be sitting on top of each other, so you rotate it back and forth so you can feel the teeth go in and catch, just like my hands are demonstrating. So once this is down here, then we can go ahead and turn this knuckle assembly so that the steering is straight again, and then we can start resecuring everything. Now we can go ahead and put the nut back onto the bottom of the knuckle, and then once again, using our 21mm socket and T40 counterhold, we'll secure this, and then the final torque on this guy is 175 Newton meters or 129 foot-pounds. Okay, now I'm ready to go ahead and put the arm back up into the subframe mount, and if you look at this metal piece that came out earlier, it's really not held in by anything. It's just secured to the subframe and clamped with the bolt like that. But if you look at the subframe mount, you'll notice there's a notch, and on this metal piece there is a corresponding nub. So when you put this piece back in, make sure that nub matches up with that notch. I've seen some people ask, what is the function of this piece? Quite honestly, I'm not terribly sure myself. It just looks like a supporting piece, or it could be something in case there's a crash on this side. But anyways, we'll go on to this bolt. This bolt goes through this piece and through the bushing or monoball and securing it to the subframe. BMW recommends you replace this bolt every time. You don't have to, it's not absolutely critical, but that said, if this bolt is reused lots of times, you may notice it starting to loosen up. So there is some merit to it. So when you put this back up into your subframe mount, the holes in the bushing or monoball, whatever you're using, may not align perfectly with the holes on the subframe mount. So what you're going to have to do is grab the knuckle and rotate it, like you're steering, a little bit until those holes align it, to make it easy to secure this this tension strut bushing or monoball. So I've already done that. I've placed this up here. I'm grabbing the bolt, putting it in, it's working its way in, as well as getting that stiffening part up into its position, and then I just have to screw it in. And that's another part that may be a little tricky because this is blind. So on a lot of other designs, this bolt goes in one side, and then you hold up a nut to the other and you clamp it, and the lower control arm, or the wishbone as BMW calls it on these vehicles, acts like that. But on this one, the nut that you actually thread this into is an integral part of the subframe. So basically BMW took the nut and they welded it to the subframe. So there's nothing to grab onto the nut on the other side, and you're really just going into this kind of blind. So sometimes you can have difficulty getting this bolt to line up exactly on the other side. So you may have to manipulate this control arm a bit in order to get those to align. Luckily, this bolt for me went in pretty easily on both sides. I didn't have to play around with it much. So I'm just going to use my 18 millimeter and I'm going to secure this down. So now that this bolt is all the way in and it's securing this metal bracket, we're ready to put final torque on it. But there's something that we need to take into account before we do that. If you're using a monoball like I am, I can just go ahead and final torque this right now. But if you're using the OE bushing, which looks like this, you need to set the wheel carrier, so the knuckle assembly, at normal ride height. And what that means is put a jack underneath the brake rotor and lift up or jack up the knuckle assembly till it's at the position it would be if the car was on the ground with a wheel on it, the normal height. And the reason why you need to do that is, if you look at this OE bushing, it's made out of rubber, right? So this is its normal resting position. And if you clamp this and then if you clamp this when it's not at normal ride height, so right now when the suspension is in full droop or fully unloaded, and then the car gets set down, well, the center portion is going to be clamped, but the bushing itself is going to rotate as the suspension compresses. So then what's going to happen is you're putting a stress on this rubber here, because now it's not sitting at its normal resting position and it's instead twisted. So not only does that put stress on the rubber and make it wear out more quickly, but it also adds a little bit of spring tension as well. And so your bushing is actually going to want to be pushing your wheel down when it's just sitting at normal ride height. Now we're ready to torque this bolt to final torque. The torque spec on it is 100 Newton meters or 75 foot-pounds. And if you're using a brand new bolt and using the OE bushing, BMW says to also give it an extra 90 degrees turn after reaching that torque spec. Now that everything's secure into here, we can go ahead and put the bottom cover back on. So I'll just slide this up here underneath the main shield. And then once this bottom shield is in place, we can go ahead and put all of the screws back. And don't forget about the 2 screws in the wheel well as well. Alright, now that everything underneath is all bolted up, we verified that the teeth on the drive shaft are matching the teeth on the back side of the hub. So we've taken the drive shaft from behind and twisted it left and right to make sure that the teeth slot into the ones on the hub. We can take our new carrier bolt and just get that started in there. And then we can take our 17 millimeter hex and get that bolted up. And then we'll set this to final torque when the car is on the ground, so that this rotor or the hub assembly is being held steady. Of course, once again, if you have a helper, you can have them stand on the brakes to keep this from rotating as well. But I don't, so I'm going to put the wheel back on, and then we're going to put the car on the ground. So now I'll go ahead and put my wheel back on and secure it with my 17 millimeter. Now that our wheel's on, we can go ahead and send the car down. Now that the car is on the ground, we can go ahead and put final torque on the collar bolt. And the torque spec on this is 210 Newton meters or 155 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. So, a lot of people are like, oh, well, my torque wrench only goes up to 150 pounds. That's close enough, actually. So just set it to 150 pounds. Get the final torque. And then go ahead and grab something like a breaker bar so that you can give this an additional 90 degrees. Then if you have a pre-LCI car and you want to put that secondary dust seal over this bolt, you have to put the car up in the air again, take the wheel off, put that in, then put the wheel back on, and then lower the car. Or if you have LCI, just like mine, we just take our end cap right here and we'll just pop it back in, and then we're done. Don't forget to torque your wheel bolts to 140 Newton meters or 104 foot-pounds. Now you may be wondering at this point, do I need to get the car aligned right away? In fact, BMW even says, oh, if you're playing with these control arms, go get an alignment. In my experience, the tension strut itself doesn't affect your alignment quite as much. It'll affect your caster, but since this is usually fixed, you know, it'll end up being you get what you get. So, you know, playing with the, or rather replacing the tension strut won't throw your steering off like crazy, like replacing the lower control arm or wishbone can. So, you know, yeah, you probably want to get alignment, but is it like, oh my God, it's the first thing you need to do right after this? No.